Hi, I'm Rachel Dillon, and together with my husband, Marcus Dillon, we lead Who's Really the Boss podcast, where we highlight the joys and challenges of running a business with your spouse or family. Our mission is to strengthen families and businesses by helping listeners avoid the mistakes we have made so they can lead and live happily ever after. Welcome back to Who's Really the Boss podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
I'm excited today to talk through what really happened during tax season. We've had time in between tax season actually happening and ending to kind of recover from what actually happened. So this is going to be our tax season recap episode, but we're not going to share highlight reels only. We'll share the good, the bad, and the ugly, everything in between. So excited to talk through that today.
Yeah. And you opened it up and said tax season. I would just say it's more of like a busy season because we have a lot of non-tax projects during that time of year. So while it is the tax deadline season, I would just say that it's busy, right? You know, it's a season. So we do a lot during that time of year. A lot of our friends focus on tax. And so they know what we're talking about. But, you know, it definitely is a busier time of year than the rest of the year.
Yeah. And even before we start talking about that, because also what that means is we're kind of going to give a recap of what's happened January through April of 2024. But during that time, we have to update on Kinley, our oldest. So we haven't talked about Kinley for a while. So we have two daughters. Kinley is about to turn 19 and just finished her first year in college. And Avery is 16 and finishing up her junior year. So we'll give an update on Avery on the next episode. But this week, talking about Kinley and kind of how she ended up after her first year of college. So what are your thoughts to share on her first year?
It was a good year. She was closer than she was the prior semester. Obviously, the prior semester she was in Switzerland. This time around, she was in Waco, which is about 3 hours door to door from our home. So closer. The one thing I do not miss about her being home, she's been home for about a week now, is like the tornado of stuff that comes along with her. She's very creative between baking and sewing and everything. So just kind of feel like a bomb went off in different rooms of the house. Maybe I don't even know what all rooms were impacted, but a lot of rooms were impacted. So it's good to have her home. Maybe we need to work on organization and cleanliness whenever you do come home from college. So.
And so I think, yeah, leading or contributing into her tornado is actually the amount of time that she'll be home. And so she finished up, she had the best semester in Waco at Baylor and made a ton of friends, new connections. She was in a new small group, a new church home, and just a ton of new opportunities. And so through that, she went ahead and planned out her entire summer to pretty much not be at home. So she had only a 5-day window that she's actually going to be here and had, I think it's 9 or 10 bags that she made, like sewing bags. And she had 4 graduation cake orders. And so trying to get all of that completed within 5 days meant there's no cleanup time in between. Like she starts a project and finishing the project, the next morning. And so, so with that, I think it's comforting to hear at this, like simultaneously, her mixer going and her sewing machine going in the other room with the TV turned up loud enough that she can hear it over all of her projects that are happening. So it's been pretty awesome having her here. And so you want to tell a little bit about where she'll be this summer?
Yeah, so she'll be going on a mission trip for 2 weeks, I believe, to Bogota, Colombia, with her church. So she's raised money by making the bags and doing all that fun stuff. So if you follow her on social media, like that's what she's doing. I know a lot of our friends and listeners do that. But then she's also working at a camp this summer that is handicapped individuals, and we'll be there for 4 or 5 weeks, right?
Yeah, she's supposed to
Yeah.
be working for 5 weeks. And so that doesn't take up her full summer, but she had already planned to volunteer at that same camp before she got hired on. And then also now has a week of training. So that is really going to leave her 2 weeks home in June and a few days home in August before she goes back to school. So she has a full summer coming up. And if anybody is a brand new listener and doesn't know Kinley, you can follow her on Instagram at Kinley's Confections, and that's Kynley. So that's fun. You can keep up with kind of what she does in her businesses. I'll say businesses because I feel like she's, starting a couple here now. So
Yeah.
that's her update. So let's get into what Dillon Business Advisors, we'll call it tax season, just because that's a familiar term. Most people understand what that means, but really that time period from January through April, and we're recapping 2024.
Yeah. So the 2023 returns that were done in the spring of 2024. So were quite a few changes compared to last year, and we'll get into those as far as team is concerned and overall how many returns we prepared or how much revenue was, different things that we did in between last tax season to this tax season will kind of bring us full circle. Also, the team makeup that is in place today and moving forward, and then what we learned in that process and what we're going to be looking for and trying out, testing, or implementing before next tax season, because it'll be here before you know it. And I think some of us were recording this in May. It'll probably release in June. Some of us that have gone through tax seasons, as rough as they are, we can forget how rough they are pretty quick. And I document the pain while it is real. That way you are motivated to make changes in your practice. That's what we've tried to do as best we can. And that's what this episode is about, what we've learned.
So you brought up a great point. So I think it would be perfect to start even before April. So let's go back to as 2023 was ending and we were preparing for what would come in 2024. What are some of the changes that we learned or kind of fell into near the end? We'll say like Q4 of 2023. What were some changes that took place that would definitely impact our tax season?
Yeah, I think the main one, we're in the people business, right? So it's team, changes in the team makeup. So if we look back in Q4, our tax director, he exited the practice and went and started his own firm, which is great. We supported that decision and it made a lot of sense for him and his family. So, but on our side, we have one less leader. Tax director roles important in most firms, and so that was a change. Going back all the way to tax season of 2023 with the 22 returns, we actually had we were one more client controller at that time. We did some restructuring in March of 2023 and had did not have the need for one CSM position and one client controller position. So we had two less team members, FTEs, coming into this tax season compared to last, and one less tax director as far as that makeup is concerned.
And we've talked about that before with some of our client transitions that we've initiated on our part and certain things that we've done within our business that it's never our goal to downsize necessarily our team. For some of these, the performance did not match the expectations of the firm. And once those two positions were removed, we realized after we realigned based on that need that we didn't have a need for those positions. So it wasn't where we all of a sudden just didn't need two people. It was more that there were some performance issues and expectations that weren't aligning. And then once we realigned really verticals of clients and teams, our teams of 3 and our pods, then we realized we didn't need to go out and hire for those positions again. But all of that said, for this tax season in 2024, we were 3 less positions than what we previously had in years prior.
Yeah. So, and that's just on the production side. We had two less admin team members, or sales and business development team members as well. So, five total headcount down from last year, and then three production people down from last year. And then the other changes that we saw this year over last, we exited clients. So some of those annual client relationships that no longer fit the model of DBA, we exited those. We monetized that client block. It was about 35 family relationships. And when we say family relationships, that's like a 1040 additional business returns or additional trust returns. It could be a makeup. It's more than just one tax return or one person's tax return most of the time, especially when we got to that. So those 35 families made up about 75,000 of annual recurring revenue. None of those clients were on a monthly recurring revenue model. And so we exited them just because, as we'll talk about here in a bit, who works on those 35 annual relationships was challenging in years past. And we knew going into this year, we were going to maybe have a capacity issue with three less full-time equivalents in production.
Yeah. And so I believe you can definitely hear more details on what we do once we identify clients that are no longer best served within DBA. I think there's an M&A transaction podcast previously recorded out there that you can listen to that kind of talks through how we determine that, and then what we do with those clients after they're identified. We had, with our director of tax exiting, we really wanted to make sure that our team felt supported in that area of tax, just meaning that they had someone that they could go to for very technical questions, or maybe questions that they were not familiar with or just confident in making on their own. And we didn't want that to be limited to just you, Marcus, because one, that will cause a capacity issue immediately if there's only one person who can answer questions for them. And then two, also because, again, you don't spend majority of your time doing tax, researching tax, or learning new tax laws. And so wanted to make sure that there was somebody who was an expert at that, so that our team would have comfort knowing they have a resource available to them.
Yeah. And so the director of tax in the past, all of 2023, his production hours were around 700 hours of production. And so we knew that if worse came to worse, we had to replace 700 billable hours, right? Production hours. And then there's probably going to be additional admin time. He did a really good job setting up systems and processes while he was a part of DBA, and equipping other members of the team to where he wasn't needed. He essentially worked himself out of a job, is what he would say. But we still had that 700 production hour capacity that could be an issue. So what we identified is somebody in the market and kind of tapped her to be a tax director of counsel, if you will, be available to our team for some of those technical trainings, technical advice, technical review that is needed with a tax director no longer being in-house. And so she was just starting her practice, kind of going solo. So reached out to her, kind of firmed up what a reasonable hourly rate was, and then kind of blocked out some time on her schedule for our team to be available. So that looked like she would be in the Tuesday whole team meeting, the Tuesday tax team meeting, which is right after. That's an hour of team meeting time, and then available on Tuesday for review and for questions, and then a half day on Thursday for review and questions. And we just paid her a reasonable hourly rate for the time that she did spend working with DBA. She was in our team's environment. She was in our tax program environment and still is to this day. And we learned a lot in that experiment. We wanted to give her a little bit of comfort with starting your own firm. Hey, you can count on us to kind of keep you busy to a certain extent as you go out and build your own practice, and we saw her as a peer that we wanted to support, and maybe it allowed her to not make some bad decisions on new clients or clients that would only fit while she's getting started. So I think that was a good match for 2024, and hopefully we build upon that as we've kind of learned some things on both sides. So the other team addition, well, there's two team additions. The other team addition.
Let's go back
Yeah.
to our tax director of counsel, because the one thing we didn't want to do, we didn't have a need to hire another director of tax full time, because we didn't have the amount of tax work to support a person who only did that. We weren't sure what even part-time meant for a person like that. So we went kind of the contracting and fractional part, set up some like loose boundaries of estimates of, we think about this much time each month is what we're looking at. And let's try it for a year and see how it works. And, at any time during that point, we can discuss and talk and, make sure that it's working on both sides. But one other thing that we tasked that position with was trainings for our team. So we have team members that don't necessarily have a tax background, but want to be in a controller role, which is one of our roles in our teams of 3 model. And so wanted to make sure that there was also someone who was giving updates and training available to train our team members, whether that was like whole group, everybody who needs tax training, or individual specific training. So that was one other area that we thought this could potentially work out to help if there was ever not very much work for tax. So maybe during some off months, but also to keep the calendar or the space open that that person would be available for training. So those are just some ideas and thoughts in case anyone else wanted to explore an opportunity like that, of things that person could do if they were looking for someone kind of in that same capacity.
Yeah, and I think it was a role that we identified and kind of built, and now sharing that role with other people, they shake their head as like, that's awesome. How can I get her number? Because it's needed. It kind of gives external perspective, almost like a peer review, if you will, but not like peer review in the sense of like audited financials and all that stuff, but truly like having an external party that you can go to. And we also have kind of that relationship with a larger firm, a top 20 firm. It's harder to get those partners at that firm to give you a little bit of focus as a small firm. So they're not as available as you would hope, but we needed to support our team and give them assurance that if they had something technical come up with a client, that they had a person that they could go to in addition to me. And that's also a great option for people that maybe on the other side of firm ownership, if they retire and they want to kind of be this tax director of counsel for other firms. I think that there is a need for that in the market. And you can ask a pretty good rate, especially during tax season. I think that's something, if you were just a retired partner or retired technical tax person, you could definitely call your shot, work as much as you wanted to, and just be available to other teams and maybe not manage clients, maybe not manage other teams.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's great. So let's talk about our other position that we added prior to 2024 starting.
Yeah, so a lot of what our tax director did was administrative work. So making sure that returns were filed, extensions were filed, kind of giving updates on tax things throughout that season. That administrative work, what we've always identified is that administrative work was not necessarily the best fit for someone that is worth more in the open market. So how do you remove that admin work and delegate it to others? We just, after it became clear that this person was no longer going to be in house, we really have to start answering those questions of who is the best person to evaluate progress of the team, keep really a good pulse on projects, know when things are coming in, when things are going out, and really just manage the whole tax season. So that role best fits in my mind with a operations person. And so we brought on a director of operations. Amy is that person. So that's part of what she does during tax season is she makes sure that the overall like efficiency of the team and effectiveness of the team on both the accounting and then tax as a part of that CAS service offering is going as best as it can. And so we elevated our tax admin a little bit too to handle some of those tasks that were handled directly by a tax director. And, you know, it's just the economies of scale with different price points and who's the best skill set to do this. And so our tax admin D stepped up in multiple ways this year and did that. And she was already a part of the team. Her time did not increase this year. It actually went down a little bit because of that client block exit, because she would also do some prep on those annual clients. So we were able to shift some admin responsibility over to her to kind of backfill her available time. So as you have changes in your firm, you're really going and looking for existing capacity on the current team. And so we did that with the final addition we made this year was an outsourced team member who sits in the Philippines. And so she does not touch the tax process, but she is also available to support the operations team. So she is useful. She is very smart, capable, and works full time with the different price points and things like that that are available. With having somebody on the other side of the world, it just made sense to kind of shift some tasks over her way. And she does them with a smile, and she does them most of the time very well. So I think that's something else we learned during those shifts in team members.
Yeah, for sure. And I think with Amy's hire, Amy's position, and the director of operations being identified as really what was needed within DBA, what Amy has really taken on pretty much everything. I think she doesn't do any bookkeeping or payroll, but maybe she does every single other thing besides that in the firm. But really, what she did was she came in and took a lot of things that you and I were doing or should have been doing and weren't giving enough attention or focus to, and really started helping put processes in place and helping to delegate and elevate our team. So, like identifying and elevating our team members to help her. So, not that she has to take on every single role and do every single thing all herself, but that's why the director of operations that we identify, that's why Amy specifically is really amazing, is that she can come in and see, okay, these are the things that need to be done. And these are this is the appropriate person to ask. And then she can set up what that process looks like so that they can be successful with that new responsibility. Obviously, that is helping a ton with team development and leadership within the team, not just at one level or by a couple of people, but really within all the team members. So that's really been a great addition. April, who is our outsourced team member, Amy is helping to manage her responsibilities right now, but that means that Amy can identify when there is a CSM who needs additional help, or there is a piece of a tax project that needs something that's more along the lines of administrative. She can tap April and get her started and going, and then April can complete that. So all of those team members that we added and positions that we added have so far been amazing and help contribute to the success of the 2024 tax season. So as people are tracking with us, we haven't even gotten into the actual tax season, still talking about the things that happened before. And so one other thing changed, and that was related to technology before we even began tax season, which kind of made 2024 look different from prior years. So that one piece of technology that we implemented internally in DBA was Canopy.
Yeah. So, and Amy is really the champion on most software transitions, and it was no different. We implemented Canopy right after she started in Q4, and we rolled that out internally first. So for this tax season, for the remainder of Q4, and then Q1 going into Q2, the way that we used Canopy, it replaced Thomson Reuters Onvio, which is how we track projects, track time, all that fun stuff. And we still do track time, really just to build out like budgets and look for out of scope on different projects. We do not bill by the time, bill by the hour and that's not why we track time. So, but it's a metric that we continue to value, and we have a lot of part-time individuals as well. So we're going to have to capture their hours anyway. So it works for us. But Canopy was that new home for a lot of practice, workflow, different items that we were tracking in tax season. Previously, that was done in Onvio. Whenever we started with Canopy, we made the call to just roll that out internally first. And so we wanted our team to test it, experiment with it, get to learn it better before we ever invited clients into it. And so that happened through April or May of 2024. So about 6 months fully on Canopy internally. What we did build out and tested and monitored during tax season was tax status updates being sent to the clients through Canopy. And it's essentially the Domino's Pizza tracker. And as their project would move from scan received to in preparation to review and then to client, message being sent out, every status changed initiated a message out to the client via Canopy. And that was all automated and everything that we set up there. So we had clients reach out early tax season asking if Canopy was doing the tax return or if we were doing the tax return. So we probably could have done a little bit, and that was only one person. It doesn't really matter.
Prior to them receiving their first status update, we did let them know. And so that was really our first introduction, or if you want to call it like a drip campaign, to kind of make them aware, bring awareness that we are introducing a new software. It's mostly on our side, but they will be using it in the future. And so we kind of introduced it that you will be getting, updates. It will come from Canopy. And so this is to better serve you and to provide better communication so that you just have more transparency into your process throughout the season.
Yeah. So that we planted that seed because we want the clients to start becoming aware of that software, because there's going to be something introduced later this month, actually, to kind of transition clients to full adoption of Canopy. And for the most part, that went well. We continue to use Onvio TB, which is built into Onvio, and that's Onvio Trial Balance, to move data from QuickBooks Online into UltraTax. And that's a Thomson product. That's something that works half the time. It doesn't work well. Maybe if you've had a better experience with that product, you're doing or using it better than we are. But our frustration on that Thomson side is just different. You just shake your head. I won't go into it too much, but Onvio TB is something that we continue to use because it was a once a year purchase that we did early, maybe Q3 of 2023. So we had purchased so many licenses. It's an annual subscription. So we just continue to use it, and one less thing to change during tax season. So we knew we were pushing through a pretty big software change with Canopy, being practice management side. So we just wanted to limit the other changes that we were making with the team.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we're tracking in the right direction, I think we have identified or explained most of the changes that happened that would contribute to what our tax season would look like. So let's get into the actual numbers. So let's get into the real data and talk through how many tax returns we actually prepared and filed by the April 15th deadline.
Yeah, before we do that, let's back up, because Amy's actually sending me that as we speak, because I had to ask our tax director or our director of operations for that because I don't have it. So she's going to send that to me in a bit. Whenever we looked at 35 less family relationships, that was actually about 60 to 70 less returns in the program. So that already came off the top. Whenever we look at 500 active client tax returns in UltraTax, automatically you go down to, let's say, 440, right? Within that 440, there's a lot of clients that we serve in a team structure, but they are tax heavy clients. So that means that they get a lot of K1s. They are really past tax season. They are into extension season, if you will, and they're never going to be ready, even if we wanted to prepare those prior to March 15th or April 15th.
And I think something worth noting, and this has just been a practice that we've done ever since I've worked in the firm, which was only 2 years after it started. So since 2011, is not filing extensions because of our team or our timeline or us getting behind. So if we file an extension for a client, it has always been because of either the client choice, the client not receiving information in time, or potentially the client not sharing or signing in time for us to do it. But as far as us, we set an internal deadline of we have to have documents by a certain date, or we don't guarantee that the return will be prepared and filed by the specific April 15th deadline, that we will happily file an extension on their behalf. But even with that, a lot of times we will, if we have the ability to, we will go ahead and prepare and file even returns that come in after that, because we've just set up expectations and dates internally of when we want things to be done, when we want to start calculating extensions that are prior to even April 13th. So prior to, like, usually a week ahead of time, which gives a little bit of time. And I know originally that was something big for you because of just being able to prepare that return, invoice that return, and then wait to collect payment way back in the early days. And so pretty much it was like, I know they got it to us only 3 days ago, but I can knock it out and then I can invoice it and then I can get paid for that return. So I'm not going to hold it just to hold it. Like, I'm going to do it and turn it around if I can. So that's something else. I think a lot of times when we say, however many we prepared and then however many we extended, those are not typically decisions. They have not been made by our team because we got behind or could not handle the amount of work that came in during that time, even when we had 2,000 returns that we were filing.
Yeah. So the other thing that was kind of different this year is Texas franchise tax. So majority of our clients have a Texas return attached to their business. Texas franchise tax was updated. The forms were delayed. UltraTax kind of delayed when they released those. It was a mess. And so we had to make sure, do a lot of reconciliation after March, April, going into the May 15th Texas deadline, that those returns were done. So that was there's always going to be a curveball every tax season. Hopefully that was it for this one. We may find out if there was another one where we missed something. But the other point that we always want to make is we filed all business extensions and all like trust return extensions for the most part in the first week of February. We went ahead and filed those extensions, so we don't really have a March deadline, and everybody's just kind of working towards that April deadline and really the estimated tax payments or payments that are due with the majority of the returns. So with our, with our CAS clients, we want those returns done really in February, kind of waiting on the IRS window to open, if you will, so we can just push submit and roll on to the current year planning is an ideal world. So, but yeah, like we go ahead and extend those. We do not do that with the individuals because usually there's a payment that is going to be owed, and people don't even realize that there is a separate business tax return extension a lot of times. So,
yeah. And so as we're talking about just extensions and things, we'll skip over and then come back. But this year, and it was almost this last year, I think, but there may have been 1 or 2 people affected, but no overtime and no weekends. And so I think last year our only overtime really was probably our director of tax, maybe because there were some administrative responsibilities during that time that were taken on. And so really that I think that's something huge to highlight and celebrate, is that we are going on, a few years now of there's no overtime. It's not that it was ever required, but it was needed because we have a 2 week turnaround from the time we receive information till we want to have it sent out to the client for review. And so, really, just staying true to those deadlines and expectations that we set for ourselves. It did in the years ago require people to work a lot of overtime, even though we didn't say like this is your minimum amount of hours that you have to work. We never had to set that because just the work dictated that we were all working all the time. So I think every year we need to celebrate when there are no overtime and no weekends worked, and even for the most part stayed to our half day Fridays throughout the whole entire season. So
yeah, most of our team is only they're full time at 36 hours a week. So yeah, it was another celebration, which we took full advantage of that as well. Like, we weren't working on client work necessarily. We work, but not on client work. We're doing other stuff in the background. And then the other piece was we pushed to really wrap up things before the April 15th deadline. So we made sure that everything was done really April 10th, with a really final internal date of April 12th. So we did not want to work that weekend. We did not want things to come down to the last minute. Clients try to make you come down to the last minute, and we just don't let that happen. So, April 12th through the 15th, you're just making sure if there's any rejects on extensions or acceptances, payments that are made for the 2023 return and 2024 Q1, just that those are done in plenty of time where there's not an issue. So when we look at, other numbers that we look at are obviously revenue. So we had about $75,000 less of client tax work that was invoiced out annually. So overall, there's really not much during that time of year that is invoiced out separately, because we do include tax for the most part in our CAS engagements. We do have some large client families, but like I said, those are typically done later in the year and wouldn't be done prior to the deadlines. So our tax revenue year to date is down about 23%, but our CAS revenue is up about 10%. And so that's really offsetting tax revenue with CAS revenue. And we did price increases this year. Even though we exited clients, we did 5% or above across the board on tax, which is kind of low. We had been at 10 previously, and heard from a few clients, important clients, that, man, that 10% is really starting to sting. So we kind of knocked it down to 5 for the most part, and made sure that we had, a lot of backup in what we were doing. I mean, inflation is what it is. So we did price increases on the tax side, and then on the CAS side, we did, price increases as well. So I think those are the pieces that we can probably talk about and dedicate a whole podcast episode to just price increases and what we pushed for, what the results were, all that fun stuff. So
yeah, I'm looking forward to that in a future episode. And the reason we're leaving it for a future episode, we actually introduced or sent out those price increases to clients in February, letting them know that that would take effect April 1st, and that to remember that kind of our cancellation policy is a 30-day termination notice, or to let us know within 30 days that they're canceling. And so wanted to make sure there was plenty of time for them to receive that, evaluate that pricing if they wanted to continue to be a client, and then that they would have time to say, no, we're not going to continue any longer, and not be penalized for that. And so here we are nearing the end of May, and just wanted to make sure that if there are any other clients, after a couple of months of paying that new price, if they're still finding the value aligns with the price they're paying, and haven't raised their hand to terminate services. So giving that a little bit of room to breathe and to really shake out before we share what actually happened, kind of how we went about determining the price increase, how we sent it out, and then what the results of that were as far as from a revenue standpoint and from a client retention or loss standpoint.
Yeah. So I've got the numbers. They're not
Thank you,
surprising to
Amy.
me. Yeah. Thank you, Amy. So 2023, we did, before April 15th, we filed 224 tax returns across all different types of returns. Through 2024, we did 165. So not a lot compared to other firms, like relatively speaking. Our client base, we serve about 110, 115 families currently with their needs, and 12 to 15 of those families always file because of their complexity after tax season. So it's more of an ongoing tax advisory service, that we provide to them fully. So, but yeah, a lot less than we did last year. If you're just looking percentage wise, I can 224, 165, 59 divided by 224 is about 26% less, right, than we did last year. So,
Yeah. And then as far as kind of what that looks like. And so we have talked about this before, that we started out as a traditional tax firm. We were tax heavy. I mean, at one time we had over 2,000 tax projects. Not all of those were filed by April 15th, but a lot of those were filed by April 15th. And so really back in that time, about 20% of our revenue came from what we would call CAS at that time, and about 80% was tax. We have completely reversed that where we are now, where
yeah.
only about 20% of our revenue comes from tax and 80% comes from our recurring monthly CAS services.
Yeah. So I would say 10% previously was A&A, so audit, review, compilation. 10% was like bookkeeping, CAS, payroll maybe, and then the 80% was tax. Back then, so I think the year was 2017. It's kind of easy to remember. We passed the $1 million in revenue mark in April with all the April 15th filings and everything like that. 80% of that was made up through tax, right? And just this past April, we again passed the $1 million revenue mark, and most of it is recurring CAS. And as you can see, only 165 returns filed. So that kind of puts us on track. We'll probably touch 3 million this year if everything goes right. We haven't, pushed by any means to kind of get crazy onboardings in or anything like that, because we didn't know what tax season was going to look like without a tax director or some of the capacity gaps that we thought we had. But now that we're through tax season, it gives us a lot more assurance what the future looks like.
I feel like we shared some of the dreamy things, like only 165 tax returns prepared and filed.
Yeah.
And that was not with like having to extend and people being angry about it, right? Like those were the ones that were here, ready, and needed to be filed. And we also shared like no overtime, no weekends, only 36 hours or less per week. Those were the dreamy things. Let's talk about some of the things that we don't necessarily want to highlight. And certainly we don't want to highlight these with the client, but we are a monthly recurring services firm. That means there are responsibilities and deliverables that need to go out every single month. So for us, that's financial statements with commentary that we send to clients every single month, with an internal deadline and an outward facing promise that those will come by the 15th of the following month. And so what did that look like for us? Because those same team members that work on that monthly client work also prepare tax returns. Our controllers are responsible for the tax, but they also review those financial statements and record commentary and send that out. So talk a little bit about, kind of the thing that we don't necessarily advertise out to the world what that looks like during tax season.
Yeah, so we really started making a push for that 15th internal deadline to go out to clients, so they had timely, relevant financial data to make decisions in their business. And we, there's times this year so far that we haven't hit that, and it's because we didn't have the right process in place. We maybe weren't as educated internally as we thought we were on some things, and some of those deadlines were missed. And I think if you step back and look at the different levels, just even the CSM and the client controller level, and when they are busy, and it's hard to make that timeline. The December financials have so many adjustments potentially that may go into them, that those December financials are always like an asterisk. So we'd like to have at least drafts sent out during the month of January. You also have 1099, W-9s, kind of different things floating around project wise in the month of January. So that also causes a little bit of a capacity issue at the CSM level. So most of that evens out for the CSM, because the CSM does not touch the tax program, the income tax program at all. So most of that flushes out by mid-February, I would say. So CSMs are kind of back to a better cycle. But then mid-February, right around Valentine's Day, is when it always hits, is like when tax stuff starts showing up. So the March financial issuance and the April financial issuance, we just try to give a lot of grace this, time around. But I think even now we're recording this on May 16th, and I will say, like, it has gotten a lot better, both at the CSM and controller level, with these April financials that just went out. So I think overall majority of the client financials went out before May 15th.
Yeah. A lot of times where we get hung up is questions back to the client getting answered, and where our controllers may not be doing reviewing or preparation of tax. They may be in more communication than normal, or, in more communication with their CSM to work out some of those details and get those financial statements out sooner. And then also just a little bit of time that it takes to record the commentary. We definitely let them set priority depending on time of year and what client it is specifically, and kind of make those adjustments as needed. Obviously, payrolls and sales tax are taken care of by our client service managers. So that is never missed. The things when we say kind of a missed deadline, that's internally set, that's an expectation and a level of service that we want to provide. And so obviously anything that's compliance related can get a bit of priority over that if absolutely necessary. So
yeah. And then the other thing that, didn't go as well, we had some team members that just didn't have a tax background, that they didn't feel comfortable, like, in certain parts of their role, mainly the client controller, or even like client CFO, if they don't have that technical tax background. And so that was a knowledge gap that existed, and just the worst timing that it kind of hits during tax season, busy season. So what we did there, we learned that the leader that was in place was just kind of picking things up and getting, like, he would tell people to get it to a certain point, and then he would finish it up, wrap it up, and push it out to the client. And that's great and all whenever you're always going to be in that chair. But when you're no longer in that chair, that team member is not, fully educated. So that's just something, we learned, and now want to make sure that all of our leaders can fully, teach and delegate everything that they possibly can, in case they aren't in that chair for whatever reason. And how we solved that was probably early March. We saw that as a knowledge gap, and the best way to give her some assurances, that controller, was her to actually watch me review a tax return. And so we would spend an hour every week. She would bring anything to that meeting that she wanted to, and any return she wanted me to review to that meeting. And her, the CFO, anybody else that wanted to join, essentially watched me share my computer screen and walk through how I would review that return, and I would comment throughout. And by doing it that way, I think we also recorded most of those for like internal purposes. Obviously, there's sensitive data there, but just a training tool internally. Um, what I liked about doing that, obviously, it stunk that she didn't have that education or the opportunity to do that at another time of year with somebody else. But we were actually getting the work done as we went. Like whenever we finished that time together, that return was reviewed and ready for her to go record client commentary and send it to the client for signature. So it wasn't a matter of like, I have to stop everything and train somebody. We actually trained on the active engagement. And so I think that's something as you find knowledge gaps in your team, what are ways that you can do that and just share screens and make the most of your time together? Some of that hour every week was spent just talking through like theory and a lot of the client by client decisions that have to be made, and not where it's not black and white on what we do for some versus what we may do for all. And you also have to talk through like a collective risk tolerance of the firm on certain judgment decisions when it comes to tax. So a lot of that was helpful to her. I think she gave great feedback that just gave her so much more education for her role. I think we spent like a total of like 6 or 7 weeks doing that. So, less than 10 hours of that training going through like active client engagements. So that was not something that we had planned for. And throughout tax season, I also asked like myself a lot, like, what is my role? Like where do I need to step up because we no longer have a tax director? We have this tax director of counsel who is available, but where is her time best spent versus my time best spent? So I did work more production wise this season than I did in the past. Obviously, in the past we had a tax director in place. My total production hours this time around were 186 production hours, which still not a lot relative. But last year, my total production hours, the whole year of 2023, were less than 300. So, going into third of the year, I'm on track to do more than that. And I had prepared for that mentally and, different capacity things that I had done with my client base to make sure that I had availability to give to the team in that respect. So, that 186 hours probably will put me on track to do more like 400 to 500 production hours this year, given my ongoing kind of CFO production responsibilities and things like that. But overall, 400 to 500 production hours a year is not bad for a solo partner in a $3 million CPA firm.
Yeah. And I think just the specific example where you were actually sitting down and training with some of our team for an hour each week during what for some people is a very busy time of year. But when you look at it really, like you said, it was less than 10 hours, and the investment in that team member, and actually it was really 2 team members, but the investment with those team members, not only did it just continue to solidify relationships, but also now both of them are more equipped to not only complete their own work, but to train within their pod or to train within the team. And because they're coming from a non-tax background, gaining that tax knowledge, how much better is that for them to train others who their backgrounds are similar, that aren't coming from a tax? They're going to really be able to understand where they struggled versus somebody who's been doing tax for so long. They just don't even know, like, I'm not sure what you won't get, what you do know, what you don't know, what will be hard to grasp, or, what's easy. And then we can quickly move on. And so just that investment all around to not only build confidence, but like actual education, and then the ability to multiply that out to others. So I think that was a great investment for sure.
Yeah. And, kind of closing it out, we kind of talked about the good, the bad, and what did we learn or where are we going? And so we mentioned our tax director of counsel, so we touched base with her after tax season and just said, hey, appreciate you being available as much as you were. And she actually approached us to say, y'all didn't use me like you thought. Am I really needed? And so we kind of identified that it does make sense to have her in place, but more of a just-in-time need, not necessarily blocking out set days per week for review. Because we didn't want the turnaround time to expand so much with her availability. Clients saw that return was pushed to review, so they're looking for it. So we just took it on ourselves, and either I would review that, or some engagements were good enough to just push out to the client directly. And I may have put eyes on it, but most of them were great. And then, so going forward, she'll still be in place more as like a technical lead whenever the team is needed, kind of continue to provide support, education, current tax updates, all that fun stuff. And I think that's going to be a great balance. The other change is, we mentioned Onvio TB. We are currently testing and evaluating other ways to get data into UltraTax. We are good with UltraTax for the time being. And even though it stinks to have a hosted solution for a virtual team for UltraTax, we are not looking to change tax software at this time or this year. So we'll stay on UltraTax at least one more year. But how do we get data into UltraTax? And so both on the individual and the business side, Onvio TB did that a little bit. It did not work perfectly. So we'll be testing Tally4, some different options there. And then finally, we mentioned Canopy. So Canopy, the rollout to clients will happen. It's already been teed up. Clients got their first email this week about Liscio, was our previous kind of client secure communication portal, if you will. Liscio will be fully phased out, and we'll be just using Canopy more. And that just goes back to that app fatigue and using fewer programs better than more programs for just specific needs.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation. Thanks to you and to Amy for pulling our real tax season data and sharing what our tax season really looked like within our CAS firm that is made up of mostly monthly recurring revenue. So It's been a great conversation. I'll see you on the next.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks for hanging with us to the end of another episode. Leave us a review with your thoughts, comments, and feedback on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. Join us again next week for another great conversation.